This is the Debunking Economics Podcast with Steve Keen and Phil Dobbie.
The Archives.
Episode 324. Will more realistic pricing of energy and pollution save the planet?
No, interest rates should have been raised a long time ago, and the Bank of England has been too slow.
You know what? This something-for-nothing economics isn't conservative, it's socialism.
How does he look within, giving the grim data of the day?
On the inflation rate and the unemployment rate. It's called the Phillips curve.
This is the Debunking Economics Podcast with Steve Keen and Phil Dobbie.
So how did we get ourselves into the situation where economics is wrecking the planet? It is driving us to consume more and pollute more in a way which is clearly unsustainable. How much of this is to blame for what we are doing to the planet? How much of it can we blame on the supposed science of economics? If we had priced things correctly, if we'd addressed feedback loops, if we'd realised there is a finite extent to which the economy could grow, how differently would things be? And is there a chance that the planet could have been saved? What could we have done differently? And what should we do next as we try and save the planet? That's all this week on the Debunking Economics Podcast with Steve Keen. I'm Phil Dobbie. Welcome along. So one of the most discussed podcasts of late has been the one where we looked at growth, and Steve said we should be focused on zero growth because otherwise we're going to destroy the planet. But I wonder whether actually the bigger issue is that we've never fully and accurately priced energy and, just as importantly, pollution. So aside from the crisis that we're now facing over supplies from Russia, have we ever really accurately priced energy as an input for businesses and for consumers? Have we been paying too little for it, in other words? Is there a better way of representing the real cost of energy? And what would a more realistic pricing model do for innovation and consumption? Would it really slow stuff down? Similarly with pollution and waste, do businesses avoid the real cost of waste? And just as importantly, the end-of-life assets. Like, for example, when you knock a house down, are you paying, you're focused on how much it costs to build the new house? Have you really factored in the implications of knocking the house down, given that a lot of stuff that ends up in landfill is actually, a vast proportion of it is actually building materials? So we'll look at that today. But Steve, let's quickly revisit this zero growth idea, because we've got a whole load of stuff going on Twitter as a result of that. I mean, if we find a way to more efficiently use energy, I mean, surely we can still have growth if we've used energy more efficiently. So the International Energy Agency reckons that if we are to reach net zero by 2050, then energy efficiency needs to improve by 4% per year. Sadly, over the last 5 years, it's only improved by 1.3%. But that 1.3%, small though it is, shows that we are doing more with less, albeit only a little bit more and a little bit less. But if we saw energy efficiency equaling growth, then we would not. I mean, there is a relationship then, isn't there, between growth and our consumption of energy. So long as we keep growth level with how much more we're getting out of the energy we consume.
Well, there's actually a lot more to it than that, and I think, I mean, I'm going to start from what I see as the lay down misere of the problems that we're trying to solve, issues with energy and waste using the price system, and that's the second law of thermodynamics. And that doesn't, given the fact that we radiate heat out into the planet, I'm not talking about the energy load on the biosphere itself, but just fundamentally because production involves using energy to do useful work, and because that useful work leads to a degradation in the quality of energy over time, and the same thing could be seen as applying to matter itself. We produce refined minerals and necessarily slag waste on the other side. The sum total of the damage we do that way, improving the quality of stuff by effectively making low entropy, so low disorder products out of high disorder products, we necessarily increase that waste over time. If we tried to price the whole thing, you're going to lose money. Now, this I know that's going to sound a bit weird to people to begin with, but I'll use Allen Ginsberg's summary of the laws of thermodynamics to try to put it into context, because the way he summarised the laws was: the first law is you can't win, the second law is you can't break even, and the third law is you can't leave the game. So the first law saying you can't win is saying you can't create energy. Okay, the amount of energy that exists in the universe is fixed. So no matter what you do, you're not creating energy. You're transferring energy from one form into another. But necessarily, the amount of energy is constant. Energy plus matter. Okay.
But we can be more efficient about how we manage that.
We can never defeat the second law of thermodynamics using efficiency. Okay, because ultimately there has to be waste. Otherwise, you can't produce useful energy in the first place. This is why if we see cooling towers for turbines for producing energy, whether that's nuclear power or coal-fired power stations or whatever, they've all got cooling towers. Why do they have cooling towers? Because they're using energy to heat up the water, create steam and cause a turbine to turn in a fixed loop. So that the water on one side of the turbine is, high pressure, high temperature steam. It turns the turbine. If it stayed at the same temperature coming back the other way, the pressure on either side of the turbine would be constant. The turbine would not spin. So you've got to dump the waste heat into the environment to enable you to exploit the energy in the first place.
But if you've got a car which is more efficient than a car today would be more efficient than a car 20 or 30 years ago, because we've
it's also
done
heavier.
Right.
Sorry. Yeah. Okay.
But I mean, I'm getting you get more miles per gallon, for example, than you did, a decade or two ago. So there's an example of how you're using exactly the same amount of energy, but you're getting more efficient output for it. You're taking a heavier car further than you were before.
But you're not. You're still generating waste. You can't get away from waste energy,
but not as much as
but there are limits to it, and this is what we're seeing, like not so much with cars, but say with lighting sources, because if you go back to the beginnings of the electrical revolution, then the first light bulbs are incandescent light bulbs, and they generate 99% heat and 1% energy. That's why you put your hand on an incandescent light bulb, you're going to have a blistered hand pretty rapidly. Then you go to the neon system. With the neon system, you're exciting the gas neon or argon or whatever else to cause it to raise up one level and then drop one level, so a photon is emitted by that transit, and then you don't get much heat out of the neons, and they're more efficient. And now we have light-emitting diodes, and their ultimate efficiency as well. But we're literally approaching the limits of that efficiency. There are very few people arguing there's anything more efficient than an LED, but we still necessarily have to use energy to turn those lights on. So we've reached the limit there.
But so for light bulbs, though. So when I mean, there'll be other things that we can create efficient. So, for example, our electric car is going to be a more efficient use of energy than petrol cars. And are we going to find that we can create energy more efficiently, electric energy more efficiently through solar cells or wind power or whatever alternative energy sources we use? And, so aren't we going to innovate in that and therefore, use the same amount of energy, but we're just using it more efficiently? It all ultimately comes from the sun, doesn't it?
Whatever way you go, it's not an infinite solution. It's a solution now in terms of reducing the amount of energy we're producing and reducing the amount of waste. But if you're going to continue talking about indefinite growth, then the only way you're going to get indefinite growth is to use more energy and generate more waste over time. So the limits to efficiency, you're never going to be more efficient than 100%. Okay? And you're not going to reach 100% efficiency in most activities, because the laws of thermodynamics and the necessary frictions, etc., genuine ones rather than ones made up by economists, genuine frictions you can't get away from in mechanical devices and so on. So there is a limit of 100%, and we are closer to that limit than most people realise. So efficiency might, like if you were going to hit a brick wall in terms of the capacity of human civilization to use energy without destroying itself, and that brick wall was, say, 20 years away, than if we were currently operating at 1/3 efficiency, and we thought we'd get there by reaching 100%. If that was possible, it only buys us an extra 40 years, and less indeed. It doesn't. We can keep on doing it for 400 years. So seeing efficiency as a solution, I think, is the trap.
Okay, so when the International Energy Agency, I don't quite know how they arrived at these figures, when they say that energy efficiency has improved by a certain amount, so between 2011 and 2016, they were saying it was 2.3%. So presumably what they've done is they've looked at output and energy consumption and seen how the relationship between the two has improved. So they said it's improved by 2.3%. So this is sort of perhaps supporting your case. Since 2016, that's fallen to 1.3%. And they're saying, well, to meet net zero, we've actually got to get it back up to 4%. So we've got to be more efficient. It seems to be that it's getting less efficient, and that could be because you're saying, we're peaking now. We've done as much as we can, or we're getting close to it.
We are approaching a peak. I mean, if you look at the efficiency of, one of the reasons that James Watt's steam engine was such an advance over previous technologies, not that there were no steam engines, there were plenty, but what he did was use the governor, automatic governor, to stop the boilers exploding, and was cooling the water down. And so the heat exchanger was happening in 2 cylinders rather than 1. And that was a dramatic increase in efficiency over previous steam engine, which is why his steam engine swept the world, and that led to the diesel type systems we use these days being developed, et cetera, et cetera. So there was a huge increase in efficiency over those days. But we are talking a quarter of a millennium now since that issue. And overwhelmingly, in a large number of activities, there isn't much headroom to improve the efficiency. There isn't the enormous free lunch people think we have in improving efficiency in most manufacturing processes and most consumer commodities.
But there's a lot of untapped power from the sun, though, isn't there? And the moon, through
that's using more energy.
Right.
Right. They're not using existing energy sources more efficiently. You're talking about a new energy source, and therefore adding to the amount of energy we're dumping into the biosphere, and that is the problem. Particularly the waste we're dumping into the biosphere.
So so your point is that if we if we just cover the planet in solar cells and start using those as our main source of energy, if we were able to produce that many solar cells, I know there's a question mark about the minerals that are required for that to happen, but let's put that aside. If we just used a lot more of that, you're saying, well, okay, that would increase energy use, and with that energy use, we're going to see more waste in one form or another.
Yeah. So it's not a solution to change the energy source if that means you're adding more energy to the mix. But
if it's clean energy, have
you seen? There's an interesting Twitter feed on the amount of copper involved in producing modern wind farms and semiconductors and so on. And there's you're just substituting waste generated by fossil fuels for waste generated by mining minerals. So it is the people, and this is one reason I have some sympathy for the mental trap that neoclassicals got themselves into. They believe that general is better than partial, but they whack the unfortunate word equilibrium on the end of each of them, and that's the mistake. A general system is necessary. You've got to be able to look at a general view of a system rather than just a partial view. And what we tend to get caught up on all the time is the partial view, and we say, okay, well, if we swap, fossil fuels for solar systems, then aren't we, being cleaner because we don't have to burn anything? The energy is directly converted from sunlight into electricity. There's no burning, et cetera, involved. That's got to be better, hasn't it? But then, so how do you build the solar cells? And then you see the amount of minerals that have to be mined to create it. You're changing the locus of pollution. You're not changing the existence of pollution.
So then we get on to the question of pricing. We're going to take a quick break, unless, of course, you are a supporter of Steve Keen on Patreon or Substack, in which case there is no quick break. Well, it's much quicker. We're gone and we're back again in an instant. You don't have to listen to a couple of ads. But for everybody else, when we come back, I want to look at whether, pricing can help with some of this, because it's clearly wrong right now. And isn't that part of the problem? So we'll do that when we get back. So speak to you in a second.
This is the Debunking Economics Podcast with Steve Keen and Phil Dobbie.
Okay, so before the break, we were talking about the connection between energy use and energy efficiency, and the argument that, well, if we create more energy, that's going to create more pollution ultimately. So there's the question about whether we're actually correctly pricing all of this. So I think about when I throw stuff away, I pay at the most local level. Say I go to a supermarket and I buy a load of goods that are very heavily packaged. It's up to me to get, not the producer, it's up to me to get rid of all of that packaging, and I stick it in my bin, for which I've paid a flat price for my council to take it away, irrespective of how much plastic and other rubbish goes into that bin. So right there's no relationship, is there, between how much is packaging in a goods and the price you pay for that good. It might be actually cheaper to produce something which is heavily packaged because it's got a longer shelf life. So that's cheaper for me to buy and cheaper for the manufacturer to distribute. So right there, we've got a mismatch, haven't we? I mean, economic forces are not working correctly.
Yeah, well, I think there's part of that I disagree with, the part which is fundamentally true, and that is that we have an incredibly linear approach to consuming on the planet right now. So you buy the inputs at one end, you dump the waste at the other, and there's no attempt to recycle or to reuse any of that. And that means that not only is the consumer not paying for the cost of waste, neither is the producer. So the producer gets to scot-free, and that's part of the profitability of their enterprise, that they don't have to clean up the mess they're creating by the manufacturing, and when then that waste is accumulating in the biosphere, and it used to be something you could ignore 250 years ago, you certainly can't ignore it today.
So that pricing of pollution is where we've got ourselves into this mess, isn't it? I mean, that's the fact that it's... I'll give you another example. You buy something cheap from China. Yeah. You're paying for the pollution in Beijing that created that low-cost output. So people are dying, basically, because you are paying less, in effect, and we don't care because we got it cheap.
That's partially the issue, but I think imagining you can solve everything using the price system is just another conceit of economic theory, because they think if you price everything properly, you get this point of 100% efficiency. This is, it's not a direct application of the laws of thermodynamics, but there's no such point. Okay, 100% efficiency is a myth, and when you look at the role of the laws of thermodynamics here, saying that to generate energy you must have a gap between the heat of the energy source and the heat into which where you dump the waste, because it's the difference between the heat of the energy source and the heat of the environment that lets you harness that heat to do useful work. Now, that gap has to be positive. You have to have, a higher energy, a higher temperature in your energy source. So speaking particularly in terms of heat engines, but it does generalise to other forms of converting energy into useful work. You have to have that gap, and you have to have waste being generated as well. You can't get rid of it. So the idea you can price waste out of existence is believing you can price the second law of thermodynamics out of existence, and you can't.
It's not, though. It's pricing. It's putting the price on that so you produce less.
Yeah, you want to discourage.
It's like saying, if you're going to consume this, you've got to pay the right price. So it's not trying to close the gap. It's just trying to reduce the output.
Even say if you tried to get to the stage where you had zero waste being generated, you'd be losing money. And so in some ways
But you have less waste by consuming less. I mean, that's ultimately that's what you want to do, isn't it? You want to use less energy and you want to have less pollution.
Yeah.
So if you have the realistic price, we say, well, this is a realistic price of how much it actually costs to make this if you are paying the right price for the energy. But don't forget, you've also got to dispose of it, and this is the cost of the end of life of this product. You've got to pay for that as well. And so the price you're going to pay for all of these things is 3 times as much as you're used to paying. And you go, okay, well, I can't afford quite as much of that. And then maybe it'll also change behavior then. Companies will say, well, okay, we need to change our production process. Now we can't wrap it in plastic because it's so expensive. Now we've got to pay for the whole price of that. And therefore we are going to change it. So we are, we're less damaging. I take your point though, that even if they do that, you've still got this energy gap. And the only way to fix that is by having people consume less and produce less.
But it's also the whole issue of whether you can actually price things accurately, properly. The idea that an ideal price that includes all what the neoclassical economists prefer to call externalities to describe the damage we do to the environment in which we live.
Well, I was hoping you'd have an answer to that. That was going to be my next question. How do we price it, Steve?
We can't. And this is why, right. Again, having the perspective that the laws of thermodynamics gives you is vital to understanding what can be done in terms of maintaining a production system on an ecosphere, which is what we're trying to do. Hopefully there are other ecospheres where they're not creating the same damage we are, but we can't actually ask those aliens that right now. But I find Tim Garrett's perspective on this extremely useful, because if you look at life on the planet, then the vast majority of life on the planet is surviving on the energy flow coming from the sun. Okay? So the sun's providing the free energy, the plants absorb the energy, the animals eat the plants, some animals eat other animals, the waste that they process then becomes processed by microbes. You get the nitrogen cycle and the carbon cycle and all the phosphorus cycle and so on, enabling life to continue on. And if you look at the energy level consumed by like a peak predator in that environment, you're looking at a lion or a tiger, and the amount of energy they consume is far less than the average consumer does when they flick on the light switches when they come back home at night. So that means, well, what are we doing? Well, we've found these sources of concentrated energy in the environment. There's obviously fossil fuels, which were, vast expanses of organic matter that were crushed down into tiny reservoirs, and the energy content of those tiny reservoirs per unit volume far exceeds the energy consumption levels that are being enjoyed by all the animals on the biosphere. So we find a way to exploit it, and we therefore have a gap between the concentrated energy that we find in those sources and the background environment. We burn that energy. We turn it from by setting it on fire and then causing that fire to turn a turbine to turn, and the turbine generates electric current, etc., etc. We then elevate ourselves above that background level of the environment. So we're sitting at an energy consumption level per capita far above what the average animal on the planet is capable of doing. And to do that, we have to be using available free energy, and we have to be generating waste. So if we tried to price those two out of existence, we'd find we simply couldn't afford to get out of the trees.
Right. So those animals hadn't discovered economics, had they? I mean, imagine if the gazelles being chased by those lions or tigers had turned around and said, hang on a sec, there's another way.
Yeah.
I've just discovered this economics textbook. They might save their life but destroy the planet. But is there a relationship then between, because we're digging up all these little batteries of stored oil in the ground, which have given us all this energy, and that's allowed us to grow the economy, so we have this fantastic GDP. There's a relationship then, isn't there, between how much energy we're consuming and what our growth rate is. So
exactly.
GDP is entirely dependent on how much energy we consume.
Yeah. We can tinker at the edges in terms of efficiency and tinker at the edges in terms of controlling the amount of waste we generate. We certainly have to encourage a completely circular mindset. So, I think ultimately plastic has to give way. Going shopping and buying gear in plastic, which you then throw in the garbage bin, has to be replaced by going shopping and taking your own container, which you refill at the shopping centre and then empty back at the house and return again, and you don't have that contribution of the waste of the packaging to the environment. That mindset was a dramatic change from how we behave right now. That has to.
They've tried it, of course. Huh? It's tried. I mean, everyone was thinking, but who spat into the breakfast cereal bowls? And some supermarkets tried it. It didn't last very long, did it? So our attitude.
They tried it without realising how important it was.
Mm. Yeah. And we all need to recognise that. So,
yeah, at some point it has to be impossible to buy plastic packaging. So,
but again, I'm just wondering whether this can be sorted out by pricing. So if we say, well, okay, there is this relationship between how much energy we use and what the GDP of a nation is. I mean, Economics for Dummies, page 1 would suggest that the price for anything is determined by supply. And if supply is constrained because there's not as much of it, and because we're, also factoring out the full price, prices should go up. That means we wouldn't buy as much. I mean, that would apply to energy and to goods with the impact of their pollution as well. Surely,
but if you fully price the damage, even the damage we cause, let alone paying for the energy in the first instance, you end up with a negative sum. Okay? Fundamentally, we have to be exploiting a gap between the free energy we find and the energy level of the biosphere into which we dump the waste. Otherwise, we can't have an industrial civilization to begin with. So the idea of pricing it, if you priced it properly, you wouldn't have an industrial civilization in the first instance. This is the old, you can't break even. Okay, so what we've got in the mindset of economics is not only we break even, we can make a profit. Well, that profit is only possible if you're exploiting the energy gap between the energy sources we find and the background energy level of the planet. And that, if you try to close the gap by using the price mechanism to do it, you end up having a system where you can't make a profit.
So how do we fix that problem then? How do we get more stuff like this? I'll give you an example. So Brighton University has got a thing called the Waste House, which is made 85% from waste material picked up from household and construction sites. It's got an EPC A rating, which means it's very energy efficient. The walls are insulated with old jeans, plastic razor blades, DVDs. The walls are 35 centimetres thick. It takes 12 hours for warmth to seep out through this wall. How do we get more projects? How do we get that to become the norm? Because, of course, the norm is that if you are building an extension to your house or you're just not happy with your house, you just knock it down. Construction, reading this in a BBC article that says construction creates an estimated third of the world's overall waste and at least 40% of the world's carbon dioxide emissions, because basically it sits there as landfill and the landfill is a great creator of greenhouse gases. So 40% of the world's carbon dioxide comes from the construction industry, compared to 2 to 3% of the aviation that we're all concerned about. So when we knock down parts of our old house to build a new extension, we don't factor in the full cost of what happens to that waste. So how do we change to a world where things like that, where we go, I'm going to build a waste house, or I'm not going to knock my house down, I'm just going to do something with the walls using the materials I've already got. That has to be a price consideration, doesn't it? I have to be told, well, if you want to build something new, you've got to pay the real price of getting rid of all the old stuff. So you might as well keep the old stuff and build on it. That's got to be a pricing consideration, hasn't it?
Pricing is part of it, but it can't be the whole thing. We simply have to have legislative limits on what we do. It comes down to the price system cannot solve all the issues involved in anything because of the laws of thermodynamics. Again, I can hardly claim to be an expert on the laws of thermodynamics. I'm aware of them, and I put them into my thinking about the economy, but I couldn't go through and do the statistical mechanics that are involved in the calculations of entropy and so on. But I'm aware they're necessary.
But the basic argument which you've given at the very simple level is the more energy you consume, the more waste there is. Whatever you do, there's going to be more waste.
You can't get rid of it. So
energy.
what you have to encourage we have a wasteful society. There's no doubt about that. So I'm going shopping after we finish this conversation to go and buy garbage bags. It happens there were no garbage bags in the flat I'm in, so I've got to go buy them to throw out the garbage. Now, that whole throw out the garbage mentality is something which has become dominant really in the 21st century and 21st century because we just have a consumerist ideology. We don't even produce the stuff ourselves anymore. That's been outsourced to China. And so we don't even see the production of the waste, the product which become waste at a later stage. So we have a totally consumerist mindset, and that has to change. And we have to see ourselves as trying to minimise the pressure we put upon the biosphere, and that means minimising waste. So the days of garbage bags and the linear system has to go. What Kate Rower talks about, the circular society and the donut, have to be the way we think. But we'll never eliminate waste completely by doing it. We will reduce the level of waste. We cannot eliminate it completely. And the pricing system, there's no form of magic which can get rid of the second law of thermodynamics.
Right. So back to those figures from the International Energy Agency, saying that to reach net zero by 2050, we need to improve energy efficiency by 4% per year. And it was 3%. It's down to 1.3%. Probably get down to 0.5%. That would imply the only way we're ever going to get down to net zero is by significantly reducing energy consumption. Forget about the idea of energy efficiency, because it won't happen.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, we have to just consume less energy. We also talk about converting it from fossil fuel to non-fossil fuel, but of course that has all the waste implications of the mining necessary to produce the machinery that it replaces the burning of fossil fuels to create, to harness energy and do useful work with it. So we have an enormous level of overshoot, and I think there's absolutely no alternative to degrowth. The question is whether it's been planned degrowth or unplanned degrowth. And I'm horrified by the thought of unplanned degrowth, because that is sort of transition from a world of a large-scale industrial society to the world of Mad Max.
Yeah. And the rich will survive the longest because they can build the biggest barricades. And the poor will just starve to death. But we can buy time there, can't we, with substitution? So the waste from fossil fuel fed production is obviously less than the waste from solar production or alternative energy production, isn't it?
I mean, less or more?
Well, the waste is we're seeing more waste from fossil fuels than we are from the waste we're seeing from renewables.
It's a moot point, because it depends upon the mining that's involved in creating, the semiconductors, the copper that wires the semiconductors, that wires the wind turbines, etc., etc. We're still not doing a complete accounting. That's why I wanted Simon Michaud on the show to talk about his analysis. But we're not getting away from waste. We're substituting one form of waste for another. Now, the waste we're getting rid of is carbon dioxide, and we have to stop doing that because we're changing the biosphere so dramatically by pumping carbon dioxide in there, and because it's such a long-lived pollutant, that's the main danger. But to go from fossil fuels to non-fossil fuel energy sources doesn't mean we go from waste to no waste. We change.
No, but it might go.
Waste.
We go from waste. We go from waste to a little less waste, which is better than not doing it at all, isn't it?
Yeah, and all waste that does less damage immediately. And therefore have more time to work out how we get to an overall solution. And that's where people advocating nuclear power come in. Of course, they say that the energy concentration is that much higher, the waste is that much less when you do the measurements properly. So that is another issue. But I think fundamentally still we are using too much energy, too much consumption of the biosphere's capabilities, and we have to reduce that quite drastically. To the stage where there's some capacity for the biosphere not to be so badly damaged by our industrial civilization that it causes that industrial civilization to break down.
Right. But if nuclear was the answer, then that would be continuing to improve energy efficiency, which would allow GDP growth, wouldn't it?
Well, it depends. But the question is, this is how they find energy efficiency there. I mean, in that sense, the amount of energy in a small amount of uranium or thorium is far greater than the amount of energy in a gigantic amount of coal or a ridiculous number of solar panels. So yes, you'd get your ratio of energy out to energy in would look more impressive, but you're still creating waste. If you then use that to power an industrial civilization.
Right, but the waste is a lot less waste than the waste from burning coal. So
particularly in the case of nuclear. I mean, funnily enough, even though nuclear is probably the most demonised energy source, in terms of the amount of waste generated.
There'll be people screaming at their podcast player right now.
But so you take a look, and empirically, that's one thing I've got to concede to the nuclear case. With the amount of and particularly also with modern what are called water-moderated reactors, which don't use the old carbon moderators to slow down the neutrons. They are inherently safer as well. So the technology in nuclear, from what I've seen, I'm not an expert, but I follow what my engineers tell me on Patreon and so on, is safer. Far safer than we have its record as being. And the waste that's generated is far less dangerous than the waste coming out of the fossil fuel industry, or the waste could be generated by the renewables. So we have a real issue about waste minimisation. And one of the most effective ways to do that would be to use nuclear power rather than not only fossil fuel, but also renewable, so-called renewable energy, because of the waste involved in generating those renewable devices in the first instance.
Right. So if we get to, so you would concede that, there's still the potential for moderate growth if it was well regulated.
I think we're at least twice the scale we should be on the planet.
Right. Okay.
At least twice, possibly 4 times. I mean, if you go
in terms of growth, or in terms of us overall. In terms of us overall.
So therefore we can't grow.
Right. Okay.
We can't sustainably grow. The Limits to Growth, written back in 1972, was going to be regarded as one of the most prescient and informative documents ever written, which was disparaged and destroyed by the economics profession, in particular William Nordhaus. But that, we're going to look back and say, why didn't we listen to those buggers? And they said we had to change direction from 1975 to be able to reach what the sustainable future that they saw being feasible, with an income level per capita about 3 to 4 times the level that applied back in the 1970s, but much more evenly distributed. That would have been feasible. Because we ignored them for two generations, 2 times 25 years, we've quadrupled the population of the planet pretty closely, maybe not quadrupled, but certainly 3 times, and the per capita energy consumption is about, again, at least twice, if not 3 times. So the load on the planet's gone up by a factor of the order of 10 over what they saw as sustainable. And they were right. We've got to get back to it
because
again.
Energy and pollution has been too cheap relative to what we consume. That's
It's partial. It's partial, but it can't be the full answer, because we can't. The price system cannot. You can't eliminate the second law of thermodynamics using the price system.
Yeah, absolutely. Take that. So look, this would be a perfect point to finish this, but I've got some numbers here and I want to use them. Damn it, I'm not going to finish this podcast. I've done this research. I don't want to throw it away. I'm just not quite sure how it fits.
How come the numbers? All right.
I'm not quite sure how it fits into the discussion, but I looked at the World Health Organization. They've got their air quality guideline, which is based on the concentration of PM 2.5. So that's particulate matter. 2.5 is the size in micrometers. So 2.5 micrometers is 0.0025 millimeters. So this is the very small stuff in the air that can get into your bloodstream and cause all sorts of damage to your brain and to your health generally. It can kill you if you get lots of it. And we look at how much of the world falls short of the recommended concentration levels by the World Health Organization. It's 90% of the population is exposed to too much 2.5 PM pollution. And you can actually go, if you go to IQ Air, which is an interesting website, you can see how where you live stacks up. So actually where I am, we're in the safe range. So so move to Surrey. But Barcelona in Spain, for example, 7 to 10 times that standard. 94% of the Chinese population live in areas not meeting the World Health Organization standards. 88% in Brazil, 87% of France, 76% of the population of the United States, 63% of the UK, 57% for Canada, Australia, 4%, New Zealand, 3%. So if you want a healthy life, they're the places to go. Of course, in Australia, they are not experiencing the impact. They're just helping create it by exporting vast amounts of coal and other fossil fuels. But that's, I don't know. That's just interesting, Steve, isn't it? I've got no question. I just wanted to get those numbers out there. But the
numbers matter, but they're not the solution to the whole problem.
Yeah.
Okay. The fact we put everything in numbers is partly our problem. We have to say some parts of the planet are off limits, and that's what Sloan Wilson argued. I'm pretty certain that the ecological movement in general wants us to consume less of the planet and leave more for the other life forms. And that you can't just do that using the price system. You have to have controls saying humans can't go there.
Right. But we could say, okay, we want the planet to fall within these standards, which would mean you'd have to, it would be perhaps another target rather than this idea of zero emissions. It's like, well, okay, let's improve the environment. Let's try and get those numbers down, which would mean something more drastic than aiming for this net zero target, which, if you're to be believed, we're never going to achieve anyway. It's just a false hope.
Yeah. So we have to have a more sensible target, and that's getting, again, as I keep on saying, one of my favourite perspectives of what humans should be. We should be custodians of life. That should be our first, and capitalism falls, second, third, fourth, fifth priority in that list. We are the intelligent beings on this planet, and we should therefore be trying to preserve and extend life, not destroy it. And that's, unfortunately, we're doing the latter. Right. Okay. So the question raised at the beginning of this is, how do we price energy and pollution effectively? The answer is don't bother, because we just need to use less of it, which, we won't discuss now, but we've discussed it numerous times before. It just provides more weight to that argument that we've actually got to ration how much we consume, which is the idea of having this carbon credit scheme. It's probably the only way out of this. All right, very good. Refer to previous podcasts if you're not quite sure what that is, but it basically means everybody's given a certain amount of carbon credits to live off, and if you exceed that, you have to buy it off someone else at a vastly increased price. So there's a bit of a market mechanism in there helping to solve the problem. Good to talk, Steve. Catch you again soon. Okay, Matt. Bye.
So there we are. I'm going to go off and turn off some lights now. I'll put on a jumper and turn the heating down. That's it for this week. I'm Phil Dobbie, back again with another edition of the Debunking Economics podcast with Steve Keen. Next week. Thanks for listening.
The Debunking Economics podcast.
If you've enjoyed this podcast, then please share it with your friends, like it on YouTube, and subscribe to this channel.